Hello and welcome to this episode on the Thousandfold Book Club. Today we are indeed talking about Dostoevsky's The Idiot, one of the greatest books of all time. Actually, I'm just being a bit biased. This was my first book that I read Dostoevsky with, so as a result, I really love it a lot. And I am joined by Ekaterina and Perplexity to discuss this wonderful book. How are you lot?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. I'm here representing the Iron Age Archive. We have a YouTube channel and a website that kind of gives a list of different videos that kind of go along with kind of a traditional and as of late, a more theological perspective and different ideas in philosophy and other things we find interesting.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. Ekaterina, how are you doing and what are your current projects?
Oh, I'm doing good, thanks. I'm Ekaterina. I represent Katya Pavlov Art YouTube channel where I post about Slavic mythology, culture, and my personal art projects. My current project I'm working on is a series of mini comics about a Russian woman working for aliens. So it takes a bunch of time to draw. So it's my closest project.
That sounds very intriguing. If you're interested in any of that, then make sure you go check out their channels. The links to that will be in the description below. And just a quick thing about myself. I am Joshua. I run the channel Philosophy for All, which is also a podcast. And I currently talk about Dostoevsky, theology, Kierkegaard, host frequent interviews with leading scholars in the field of existentialism and phenomenology. So if you're interested in any of that, then go check out Philosophy for All. But without further ado, let us get right into talking about The Idiot. And the way this video would be structured is we're going to be starting off with the three main characters of the book, Myshkin, Rogozhin, and Nastasya. Then we'll get into some of the key themes of the book. Was Dostoevsky's project a failed project? What was Dostoevsky's intentions of the book? What was his idea of a Christ-like figure? What was religion to Dostoevsky? And then we're going to talk about some more thematic and perhaps even some more applicable ideas to society today, like, was Nastasya a sugar baby? How does that tie into things? And what is the role of social status in the book? So let us start off with Myshkin, the character, the prince, Lev Nikolaevich Myshkin, if I remember the name correctly. What are your thoughts on Myshkin? Perplexity, let's start off with you.
Prince Myshkin is one of he's the core character in the novel, but he's also one of the most interesting in that he stands out so much from the other characters. And the title of the novel, The Idiot, is something that he gets referred to as very often. And, one of the reasons that they always call him an idiot is because he's actually very forthright and sincere, and he doesn't really hide anything, and that kind of puts him into situations where maybe he's not adhering to the social norms, and he's saying things a little too plainly instead of kind of trying to work his way into boasting about himself or whatever it is. But he's such a likable character. And, in a Dostoevsky novel, it's nice to have a character that's likable, that you can, there's a lot of deplorable characters and people that are just really off-putting, but you really can't be mad at this guy. He's just so charming in a way. And just, it seems like he does care about the other characters. So I really enjoyed reading about him in particular and his lines. And his perspective on things.
That's definitely a very interesting approach to Myshkin. I think there's you do touch on a few ideas here, which we will be dissecting further on in this video and talking about a bit more. But before we carry on and talking about it, Ekaterina, what are your thoughts about Myshkin and what are your thoughts about his role in the book?
Yeah, I think he's one of these characters. You kind of consider him a moral compass, because he keeps this childlike openness and it does ties to social structure, because when you are very direct in society, when you talk to people, you come out as like a fool a little bit, because there is like formality, and on top of the formality you have to address this way, you have to do that, and when someone just comes and just throws it into your face, it's different. Yeah.
That's a very interesting depiction, and I think your childlike openness touches on a very good point, which I think we can explore a bit. And of course, we'll talk a bit more about it later when we're thinking about religion and what does Dostoevsky mean to create a Christ-like figure, which is the purpose of this book. If you read his letters to his brother, and I forgot exactly who it was, but in his letters he does talk about trying to create a Christ-like figure in this book. When we're thinking about Christ in the Gospels, there's always that imagery of Christ being related to children, the idea of children, be like a child, let the children come to me, are themes which are repeated and related to consistently throughout the Gospel narratives. And I think that's something which Dostoevsky is trying to create. There almost is this balance of how much is someone a child and how much should someone be trying to mature? What direction are we trying to go from a childlike state to maturity? And can you become a mature person while remaining that childlike state? And that's a question which I think is being asked by Myshkin. Myshkin's very much, at least to me, a character which is used to explore different ideas. Can you live like Myshkin in the world? Yes, he's a very likable character, like what Perplexity said. But is he really someone who you can embody? What are your thoughts about that question? Ekaterina, I'll start off with you. What do you think? Is Myshkin someone who you can embody in the world today, or is it someone you kind of respect, but you kind of also want to stay away from?
I think he's definitely someone I would personally respect. However, with all these complications, I think there will be a point when I will want to stay away naturally from this person, because you can't be that good, you know. It's like suspicious. It's suspicious when you are so kind, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's definitely going to take time to adjust to someone that kind.
Definitely. There are times in my life where I do meet people who, although I have to say, I don't think I can exactly call them a Myshkin, because that is a very, very difficult standard to reach. There are people who, even though maybe exerting a fraction of this Myshkin-esque vibe, if that's what you could call it, I do feel, that person might be a bit too good to be true. And that's definitely something which you should think about. Perplexity, what are your thoughts about this? Do you think you can be close to a Myshkin? Or perhaps let's also talk about the inverse of that question and say, can you imagine yourself becoming Myshkin, or at least living out that Myshkin-esque life in your life? Is that an ideal that we should strive for? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, it's really interesting that you asked that question, because the way that you framed it was perfect. That, Dostoevsky was trying to make this like almost like a Christ-like character, right? So, I'm Christian myself, so I always try to attain that, or try to reach for that. So the character of Prince Myshkin, he has a lot of qualities that I try to incorporate into my life. And, we talked about how he's very like childlike, and there's even a passage in the novel where he's kind of getting along with the children because he is showing empathy for this character, the character Maria, who is shunned from society, and no one would show her kindness, and he was the only one that took care of her. And the children noticed that, and then he kind of became like a role model for them. And it's hard to be the one outside of society trying to do the right thing when everyone will kind of denigrate you for doing that. But I don't think that I am a Prince Myshkin, but it is what I aspire to be. Even if I never attain it, I do want to aspire towards that.
Talking about aspiring towards something is something which is very key, I think, when you think about Dostoevsky. There's this feeling where on one hand he is setting that unachievable goal that we all must aim to achieve, but at the same time recognizing that sometimes it is impossible to achieve that goal. But nevertheless, we should try it. And of course, this ties to a similar a similar existentialist thinker like Kierkegaard, whose entire project is about I am trying to become a Christian, not just saying I am a Christian. I think that's something to keep in mind when we're reading Dostoevsky. For example, if you're thinking about Father Zosima's advice to Alyosha, Alyosha is asking Zosima that, well, how should I love the world? How can I love other people? What am I responsible for? And Zosima says, well, you should be responsible for your sins and also the sins of everyone else around you. And it's not verbatim, but something along those lines. And I think that's kind of the burden, the moral responsibility, the height which we are asked to achieve or attain when we are approaching Dostoevsky and when we are approaching Myshkin. Is like, yeah, we might not ever reach in our life. And I think Perplexity is completely right about this. Is sometimes these standards, these ideals in fiction are so high that we'd like to say, maybe I can never accomplish this in my life, but still it is something worth doing. It's something worth striving towards. And I think that's a very beautiful idea to have in our mind. Now, before we talk too much about Myshkin and dive into his Christ-like figure, which we will do in a bit, let's move on to the next character, perhaps his opposite, the Antichrist of the book, the Rogozhin of this book. What are your thoughts on Rogozhin? Ekaterina, let's start off with you.
I don't like this guy. Like, I just greedy. Like, he's just embodiment of everything I don't like around me. Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing to put into. And if I remember correctly, Ekaterina, you're the one who knows Russian, and I don't know it much. But Rogozhin means horns, or like something along those lines. Am I correct, or am I completely misguided?
Actually, you're very close to true. Because like Rogozha, it's like a skin of animal that you put like on a sofa, you know.
That's a very interesting idea. Because I suppose if you're thinking about that idea of Rogozhin, you're thinking about the idea. It's something which is covering. It's a very animalistic thing. And what he does in many senses is representing that animalistic urge within the book. He's a person of desire. He's acting on passion, and almost his entire idea, I suppose, we will talk about Nastasya in a bit, but his entire relationship to Nastasya is almost this acting on this desire, which he loves so much that he can't control, and then ends up, well, I'm not sure how much we're allowed to spoil in this book, but he ends up going completely berserk at the end, and I think stabbing her. So I mean, I suppose I spoiled the entire thing, but nevertheless, I suppose we are talking about this with the idea that you've read The Idiot yourself. But there is definitely that animalistic tendency in Rogozhin, which I find very fascinating, and something which is to be wrestled with. Perplexity, what are your thoughts on Rogozhin?
I'm sorry, I just have to interrupt you because I really loved your statement, and the way you describe him is perfect. It's just I just a little bit misguided you because Rogozha it's a harsh fabric. It is a fabric, but it's not like an animal skin. I got confused myself. It's like linen, but even harder. Yeah,
that's cool.
So, yeah.
I suppose you could have even more depth to that, I suppose. Even if one were to scratch my analysis just now, you could almost say that the harsh fabric is like one's heart, or at least one's exterior to the world in some sense. Of, on one hand, you have the smoothness of a child's skin on one hand, and perhaps in opposition to that childlike nature, you have that rough and harsh outer I suppose expressions of Rogozhin. And I think that's also a very wonderful way to look at it. Perplexity, what are your thoughts on Rogozhin?
Yeah, I think you touched on it really well. And even if Rogozhin isn't technically animal skin, him being animalistic is a very big part of his character. He's pretty much entirely driven by his impulses and his desires. And, you know, the thing that's very interesting about this character as well is that, one, he's very deplorable, but he's self-aware too. He's aware of his fallen nature and how deplorable he is. Like, he even mentions to Prince Myshkin that he will stab her, and I'm referring to Nastasya, of course. He is saying, if I marry her, I'm going to end up killing her, and she's aware of that too. It's kind of like he feels like he has no control over himself. You know, he can't say, oh, I have this impulse, but I'm going to deny it in myself. I'm going to fight against it. No, it's inevitable that this is going to happen. You know, he's kind of like irredeemable, which is, you know, it's kind of like, it's like you said, it's the foil to the Prince Myshkin character, where it's just he doesn't have empathy for others. Everything that he goes towards is for his own gain, his own desires.
That's a very interesting idea that you point out about the fact that he has no control over himself. And that's something I think we meditate on a lot, especially in Christianity. There's almost this idea where you're self-aware of the sin that you've created. You're self-aware of the original sin that we all have. And I suppose when you're thinking about that, you're like, well, how can we fight against these fundamental desires? And a lot of times we do fail. And it's not like we don't know we are failing. In the act of the sin, you understand that you are sinning right now. And you're like, well, all right, what am I to do now in this situation? There's times where that Rogozhin part of you takes over. And I suppose we'll analyze Rogozhin a bit more in depth when we're thinking about the Christ-like figures, because in order to think about the Christ-like figure almost in a Hegelian sense, you have to think about its opposite, the devil-like figure, I suppose. So we will touch back on Rogozhin in a bit. But before we get on to starting to think about those themes, let's go to the last character that we will really delve into and talk about in this episode, which is Nastasya. What are your thoughts on Nastasya, Perplexity?
Nastasya, I mean, I keep saying they're interesting, and it's just because Dostoevsky's so good at writing characters that are very fleshed out and feel like real people. But yeah, she is interesting because Nastasya, she is similar to Rogozhin in the way that she sees herself as like a fallen person. You know, she'll actually choose to act in a way that it kind of supports her idea of how she is for herself. And the thing is that she's most interesting in her relation to Prince Myshkin, because he can see something innocent in her, something that is kind of, there's something noble in her. There's like a pureness inside her, a purity inside her, and she can't really accept that fact. And so she will constantly do things against her own best interest. I guess in that way she's different from Rogozhin, because she knows that these things are bad for her, but she still can't help but go towards them and to make these decisions. You know, there's several events in the book that reinforce this, and you know, it's because she has this idea of herself as being kind of like a dirty person, or someone that has no good in her, and she needs to keep reinforcing that idea of herself in all of her decisions and actions.
That's a very wonderful analysis. And before I turn to Ekaterina's views on Nastasya, I would like to kind of tie in, or at least emphasize something which you pointed out, which is her purity and her beauty. And one of the things which stuck out to me most when I was reading The Idiot and sticks with me till this day is the phrase, beauty will save the world. And I think that's a very interesting phrase, especially when you're thinking about the context of it. Because a lot of times you're thinking about beauty will save the world, and you're like, well, what on earth does that mean? What is Dostoevsky referring to? Is he talking about, well, just beauty in general? Is it the beauty of a painting? Is it beauty of whatnot? And all these ideas come into mind. But then you think about what's the context of that? He's talking about Nastasya in some sense. And it's that purity of Nastasya, which he says, that beauty of Nastasya would save the world. There's fallenness in it, and there's tragedy in it, there's suffering in it, there's that struggle, internal struggle, I suppose, her making the perpetual choice between Myshkin and Rogozhin herself as well. And when you're saying beauty will save the world, I suppose in some sense it almost is a representation, at least to me when I interpret it, is that's the beauty of the human existence, the human the human conception of the world, our experience in the world. And as a result, when we're saying beauty will save the world, Dostoevsky is saying, well, yes, there might be a lot of suffering to us as humans in this world, but at the same time, like Nastasya, we have the choice between Myshkin and Rogozhin. We make sometimes good choices, and sometimes we make absolutely horrible and detestable choices as well. But that beauty, that of the suffering and the potential for salvation, is something which is very beautiful. And understanding that beauty has the ability to save the world and the entire existence. I suppose if you're looking at the world from an existential perspective, what's the point of the world? It's perhaps, if you're looking at Nikolai Berdyaev, you could say it's the realm of us to develop ourselves as creators in relation to the others around us. And if you're looking at that, then the world's purpose is to help us develop as creators, help us develop as humans. And as a result, it is precisely the reason for the existence of the world to exist is for us to struggle and develop in it. So I think there's a lot of depth to the idea that Perplexity is raising, and a lot of ideas which make me, at least when I'm looking at Nastasya, think that's one of my favorite characters in all of Dostoevsky's works. And the ideas that's tied into Nastasya is just so profound and so beautiful for me. So with that in mind, Ekaterina, what are your thoughts on Nastasya?
There are a lot of points that I would agree, and there will be a lot of points I will disagree. First of all, I do not disagree that she is the same as Rogozhin, but I will agree on that she basically self-sabotaging her happiness because she was devalued as a person since a little age, and she got so much pressure and so much shame to herself that she basically self-sabotages everything that could improve her life. Because like when she meets Myshkin, she like, and he said like and he expresses interest to marry her, like she right away says that you deserve someone better than me, so she doesn't consider herself worthy of someone empathetic and good, right? And the novel ends very bad for her, and it's just amount of trauma, amount of experience being groomed and not really valued less as a person because of it. And it does takes a lot of guts to break out of the cycle, and she almost made it, but then she flipped, and it takes so much damn effort and help to break this cycle, and it just shows how much effort you have to, even like what way you have to come through to just like reclaim your self-worth, break out from this self-sabotaging cycle, all because of the society, what society puts on us. And yeah, it's just like it's just so fucking sad. Okay, I need a therapy.
No, that's the, I suppose, the emotion that is being invoked by Dostoevsky, in the sense that he is a very human writer. Everything he writes, everything he talks about is a very human thing. And instead of dealing with the abstract, that which is unknowable, the mysticism of the world, perhaps, that other thinkers, other church fathers were working with, he takes a different perspective. And unlike the other existentialist thinkers of popular age like Hegel or Heidegger, who like to talk about abstract things like, oh, this is absolute spirit, or what's being in the world, Dostoevsky does so in a very personal way. He says, these are people like you and me, and they go through struggles and great suffering, and these are all the situations, these are the prerequisites perhaps of the human existence that allow us to reach new heights, or at least have a deepened understanding of the world. Perplexity, perhaps before we move on into talking a bit more about the individual themes, do you have anything to say about what Ekaterina just said, or the three characters in general?
Yeah, actually, that it just kind of sparked a few ideas in me where it's absolutely right that Nastasya's character, there's so much to kind of empathize with, or to kind of see yourself in her character, because, and I think this also it also gets into the Christian theme as well, because she makes choices that are hurting her, and even at the point where it seems like she can finally they're going to get married and be happy, and she can actually live a happy life, she sabotages it, right? And we do this in our own lives. I feel like we sabotage our own happiness, and the idea of sinful actions are things that we want, things that we desire, but end up actually hurting us in the long run. And so Nastasya is kind of like an embodiment of that. Is we think it's good, we think it's pleasure, it's pleasurable, it's going to make us feel good, but it hurts us. There's many things that we can think of that do that, but we're still always drawn to that, just like she's always kind of drawn to this self-destructive tendency.
Katrina, do you have anything to add on to it?
Yes. It's like, but yeah, I just would like to speak on basic psychology term, because what she has is a big trauma and she's drawn to it, not because she's used to it. Yeah, that's what is going on. And when she there is finally hope to break out of this cycle with a good partner like Myshkin, who is totally, oh, you're too cute, empathetic, and you just like everything you want to, but because it's just, yeah, and she couldn't break out from this mental cycle of what was before, and yeah, self-sabotaging is a thing.
Yeah.
Yes, that's definitely the case, and I think that touches so strongly on the theme of religion that there's nothing which can stop me from turning our attention to religion and the religious applications of it. And before I go on and talk about the even more religious Christ-like figure and what does that mean to Dostoevsky, let us start off with just talking about religion as a whole, because when I'm looking at the corpus of Dostoevsky's works, you have books like Demons or The Possessed, whatever you want to translate it as, the Brothers Karamazov, you have The Idiot, of course, you have Notes from Underground, all these wonderful, phenomenal works, Poor Folk, whatever. To me, and I've had some people object to me on my YouTube channel about this, but I do think that The Idiot is fundamentally the most religious work, and we'll, of course, talk a bit about whether this was a failed or successful project in a bit. But I think there's so many themes here which represent the religious story, or the Christian narrative, at least. Myshkin, I don't think it's right to say Myshkin is necessarily exactly the same as Christ, but I think Myshkin is very close to Christ. Rogozhin is closer to the devil. He's a tempting force, which doesn't always seem completely evil at times, because he does feel that you do feel when you're reading Rogozhin that he does have this sense of self-awareness, which does make it, I suppose, a bit more someone who you could empathize with a bit more. And I think that's something which definitely does reach out to you. And I always have that picture where in my mind of Rogozhin and Myshkin looking at the painting of Christ in the tomb by Holbein, and they're looking at that and they're saying that painting is so dreadful that it could make you lose your salvation. And if you're watching this, X put a picture of this painting onto the screen in your edit. But I mean, it's a wonderful painting. I really love it. And in the same way, I think there's this idea of almost there being the depth of how far one can fall, especially from God falling down to man, and in fact suffering and dying in the worst way possible, is not only provides two potential reactions. On one hand, it leads to admiration, it leads to the reaffirmation of the love of God, I suppose, that Dostoevsky is trying to present through the character of Myshkin. But on the other hand, it's trying to present, or at least it's trying to depict, some extremely gory scene, which you're thinking, like, how on earth could God do that? Surely God cannot exist, because God would definitely not allow himself to do that. And I was talking to a friend about this recently, and he came to my room because I'm in college right now, and I have a crucifix in my room, and he looked at the crucifix and he was like, I never understood why Catholics have a crucifix, because a crucifix is so gory, I cannot imagine any child looking at it. And then that hit something in my head. It's like, that is exactly what Myshkin was trying to get at, or Rogozhin was trying to get at, when they were looking at Holbein's Christ and Tomb, it's like, that is so gory. It can have two effects, and those two effects is fundamentally a religious question. When you think about Christianity, are you choosing God who loves so much but suffers, which in many senses is what Myshkin does throughout the book? Or do you choose to reject that love and suffering and say that suffering is just immense, and let that suffering and destruction and that self-destruction, because you're rejecting that love, in almost in a self-pitying sense of, I pity myself, I cannot accept that love of God because of how much that love has fallen, then you fall into Nastasya, which kind of represents the human condition, as we've discussed about already. So I suppose there's this nuance. I hope what I've said just now just kind of starts uncovering the nuance of Dostoevsky's theology, perhaps, in The Idiot. And I suppose the question I have to you two is, well, what are your thoughts on that? And do you have anything to add, agree, disagree? Ekaterina, let's start off with you. What are your thoughts about it?
First of all, I have zero empathy to Rogozhin because he's just a piece of crap, okay? Okay. I will spoilers. I'm pretty sure at this point everyone is aware of the plot of the book, okay?
Yes.
The final, like, Rogozhin clearly knew that he feels aggression and aggressive behavior towards Nastasya. He clearly knew that, right? And he took advantage of her poor mental state, and he took her with him. If he had any dignity, he would just leave her in a safe space with a person who cares about her, who is Myshkin, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he clearly took advantage of her poor mental state, and it ended up how it ended up, because he clearly knew that what he's about to do, and that she got like confused, scared, and he clearly took advantage. Like, I just like, oh. Okay, just I'm passing the stage, okay? I need to process it. I'm passing the stage, okay? So
that's a very deep thing, and I think that's at the heart of Dostoevsky's dilemma of this book, and I think that spirit is something which Levinas, a thinker which is not very well known, but someone who I've recently interviewed, a professor on Levinas. And he was deeply influenced by Dostoevsky. He was a French thinker who had Jewish heritage, and he read a lot of the works of Russian existentialists like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. And one of his contributions to philosophy is that philosophy is fundamentally a realm of ethics. And while it's a very complex thing, I'll try to summarize it in the shortest way possible, which I think is extremely applicable here, is that we have responsibility to every single other without bound. And I think that's what Myshkin is trying to do here, is that on an ethical landscape, Myshkin is challenging all of us to take the ethical responsibility to its absolute extreme, that no matter how bad someone is, and I'm not trying to defend Rogozhin, he is an absolutely horrible person, Myshkin still shows love and kindness towards him till the very end. Now, of course, Levinas was a sufferer of the Holocaust, and he was a Jew. He was a Jewish theologian and thinker as well. So during World War II, he was put under great suffering in the prison camps. And as a result, if someone asked him, well, what would you do to the other, which is an SS guard, he would say, well, ethically, I have that responsibility to him, but based on justice, I cannot. And based on human things, there are other things which I may rather prefer over it. And that, I think, is the response, I suppose, the reason that we have, which Ekaterina presents very beautifully, is that reason, you have that feeling that you cannot possibly forgive or accept any empathy towards Rogozhin. But at the same time, there is that questioning from Dostoevsky to say, no matter how far someone falls, can you save them? Can you forgive them? And that's a challenge which I think is across that none of us can bear, but that's why Christ is Christ. And I suppose we can only aspire towards that and aspire towards the ethical. Perplexity, what are your thoughts on this so far?
Yeah, just to go back to what you're mentioning about the scene with the painting, the Holbein painting if I remember correctly, that was kind of the impetus for him to write this novel, was his reaction to seeing that painting in person. And he even gives that kind of reaction to his character, Prince Myshkin, as well. And seeing just seeing the sacrifice, and, in one way it can, like you said, there's like two interpretations. It could make you think like, well, how could something so horrible like be allowed, like that can test your faith? Or you can see it in the way that like, well, it's so beautiful that or so loving, like so the amount of love is inconceivable to us that this would happen. And like you were mentioning, the reaction to the crucifix and things like that, it can be very confusing to people that aren't familiar with Christianity. And the reason we call it Good Friday, and it's like, well, that's where he suffered and all this, but it was horrible, it's graphic, it's gruesome, but it was done in an act of pure love. And there's even a moment in the novel which is, it's a really beautiful moment where Rogozhin and Myshkin kind of, they're talking about their crosses, right? The tin cross that he bought from the person saying it was silver. He knew it was tin, but he bought it anyway. And he trades it with Rogozhin's golden cross, and they become like brothers. Rogozhin introduces Prince Myshkin to his mother, and they have like a very tender moment there, which is very surprising because it almost seems like out of character for Rogozhin to do something so, like to open himself up and to be kind of show a loving side to himself. But in the end, he is a human. He is just a person, and there is something in him that could possibly be redeemed. That it's never too late for anyone. There's always that possibility for redemption, even in a character as deplorable as Rogozhin is. But I really love that scene, and it gives you like a little bit of hope for the character, which unfortunately does not really play out in the novel. Like he kind of just descends further and further, but it shows you like a little glimmer of that.
That's a wonderful point, and your illustration of Good Friday, I think, is something which is very, very wonderful, because I've recently been researching on Luke and Luke's presentation of the death of Jesus, and what is unique to Luke, and I don't mean unique in a very new sense, but what Luke does is very interesting from the rest of the Gospels is that the renting or the tearing of the temple cloth and all these events happened before the death of Christ instead of after the death of Christ, which you see in Mark. And what I think is very interesting about that is that, and I don't agree with some of the scholars who say, well, the writing was purposely written as such to make the death of Christ the good thing, insofar as turning back to the Socratic death and say, well, Socrates' death was good and everything before that was evil, so that when he died, that was good. And as a result, Luke changed the original text to suit that reading. I don't agree with that at all. But at the same time, it does point out an interesting note about how the death of Christ is fundamentally presented as a good thing, especially in Luke. And I think that's something to keep in mind, is that sometimes it is at the depths of depravity that we have the greatest potential to see the light. I think that's a fundamentally Christian narrative, which isn't really found in many other religions in the world. And I think that's something very important to keep in mind. Ekaterina, before we move on to talking a bit about the Christ-like figure a bit more, what do you think about what we've discussed so far? Do you have any agreement, disagreement? What are your thoughts on it?
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree that empathy opens many doors, and like ability to see something good in people it's deeply respectable. First of all, it takes a lot of it's something unique and something to aspire to. However, yes, you can find something, just a teeny tiny bit of, there's just some people that, like, it will be better for and safer for everyone if you're just not going to be there. It would be so much safer if just Rogozhin wouldn't be there. You know, like you don't have to dig deeper. You have to just do the right thing sometimes.
Yes, I think that's a very interesting point, and that ties us perfectly on to the idea of the Christ-like figure. And Christ, I think, when I'm thinking about the idiot, is fundamentally represented by Myshkin in the sense of forgiveness and in the sense of ridiculousness. And when I was telling some of my fellow Christians about this, they were like, how on earth did you dare call Christ ridiculous? And I was like, well, think about it for a second. Christ comes down to the world. He goes on the cross, knowing full well who's going to be saved and who's not going to be saved. And I'm not talking about this in the Calvinist or non-Calvinist predestination, not predestination. But he knows that a lot of people are going to reject, mock him, laugh at him, do all sorts of deplorable things and horrible things in his name. Yet he still goes on the cross and dies for the few which will be saved. Now, I think that's a very interesting question. And that's something which I think about Myshkin as well, is like a lot of times we present Myshkin as someone who is sincere, someone who doesn't know what's going on around him, a sense of naive acceptance of the world around him and just views good in everyone. But then I was I'm thinking about a potential other reading of Myshkin. Not that this is what Dostoevsky intended Myshkin to be, but perhaps a question that Dostoevsky intends to raise is, well, Christ might not exactly be like Myshkin in his naivety, but what if Myshkin knew everything that everything was doing to him? What if he knew that people were scamming him, yet he still decided to do the right thing in every single circumstance? And not the right thing is in the sense of justice, as Levinas would say, but rather do the right thing in the ethical sense, no matter what ridiculous consequences they are, to do the right thing in every circumstance. Is that the Christ-like figure? Is that the ridiculous nature of Christ, that we notice that we are the sinners in this situation? In some sense, we are the fallen people. We need Christ's salvation. We need Christ coming down from heaven. Is that something which you feel something within you ties into this idea of Christ? Or do you think that this idea of Christ's ridiculousness perhaps goes way beyond the bounds of reason and goes into heresy? What are your thoughts about it? Perplexity, I'll start off with you.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that, because it's the idiot, right? Like he is mocked, but in a way, like Christ was mocked too, not in a way. He literally was. And in Matthew 5:11, I'll just read it real quick. It's blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. And then he says, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. So it's constantly emphasized that you can live of the world, or you can live of the kingdom of heaven. And if you live of the world, people will not mock you. They'll glorify you of the world, but your focus is in the wrong place. And I noticed this as well. As a Christian, you're constantly mocked and called an idiot and, reviled. People will revile you. And that is the nature of the world. So the character that kind of is like the Christ-like figure in the novel, Prince Myshkin, he is also called an idiot. He doesn't ever get mad at being called an idiot. And it doesn't ever influence his behavior. He always laughs it off or doesn't pay it much mind. And, his heart is in the right place, and he will have empathy towards characters, even though they say he's being foolish for having that empathy or to show them the concern. So I think it ties in perfectly. And, humility is such an important part of Christianity, and it's also a trait that you see in this character. You're not trying to get people to say how great you are. That's not your aim. I just see so many parallels, and it has to be intentional that Dostoevsky wanted this to be seen within this character.
That's a wonderful presentation. Ekaterina, what are your thoughts?
I would like to extend the point on focus, because Bible says that you have to love your enemy like you love yourself. So this core concept of self-love is clearly missing, and it's something that would help Nastasya in the first place. The core concept of self-love, highlighting self-love, like very much a lot highlighting that. That keeping empathy no matter what happens is just important, just for you to stay human. It's just, I think that this whole concept should be process that you have to start with loving yourself and accepting yourself and knowing that you are gorgeous creation of God, universe, highlight necessary. And I think that, yeah, again, the core empathy, because a lot of aggression comes from a lot of insecurities. And if we switch focus and just focus on developing healthy self-love, that is core concept of Christianity that is constantly ignored, world will be better place, because even if someone says something, you know your worth, you know who you are, and you're just going. And it would just never happen to Nastasya if she would get the healthy concept of self-love. My gosh, poor girl. Бедная девочка.
Yes, indeed. I think the idea of self-love is something very important, and that respect for the other can only come through the respect of oneself. And I think that's the fundamental, I suppose, distinction that one must make in the world, is that there is this point of where, yes, you can die for things, you can sacrifice for things, but at the same time, you need to understand who you are as a being in the world and the responsibility that you have to yourself. And now, before we move on and talk a bit about whether Dostoevsky's project was a failed project, I would like to talk a bit about some of the influences that Dostoevsky had for Myshkin. And of course, influences is Christ. I mean, I don't think I have much explanation needs to be done on that front, unless you disagree with that. But I think there's not much explanation that needs to be done on that front. But at the same time, one thing which is very interesting is that in his letters, he describes Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes as one of the most Christ-like figures in history. It's a Christ figure par excellence in fiction. And I found that was quite an interesting thing. And of course, Don Quixote is this quixotic interesting quixotic character in Spanish literature, widely considered as one of the first novels in history. I was wondering what thoughts you had about that, just the idea that to Dostoevsky, Christ is this kind of strange figure who stands out from the rest and gets ridiculed. I mean, we've touched upon it a bit, but perhaps let's delve into a bit more. Ekaterina, what are your thoughts on that reference to Don Quixote?
I think that it's pretty distinct reference, since this empathy, childlike empathy, is something that unites Myshkin and Don Quixote. And also, since we kind of covered Rogozhin and his last name language meaning, Myshkin is a form of mysh, means mouse. Yeah, what do you think about that? Like Myshkin, so basically he's like a prince of mouse prince.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting concept. The idea of a mouse is, of course, you have this very weak, meek mouse, and I suppose that's a blessed are the meek, which in the Beatitudes, and that's a very interesting concept. And the idea of a mouse, I mean, I think you could get rid of the idea of, oh, there's a mouse in my house and I must send the cat to kill it, but more so of the mouse is a weak character and someone which is almost subject to the dangers of almost anything thrown at them. And I suppose that's something which you can think about of Myshkin, is that there is that potential of suffering and that that potential to be the victim of everything, that openness to that suffering is something which is very unique and very special, I would say. Perplexity, do you have anything you'd like to add to it?
Yeah. So as far as like the Don Quixote reference and just how the behavior of Prince Myshkin seeming very silly or ridiculous, it kind of reminds me of the Kurt Vonnegut quote of a sane person to an insane society must appear insane. So if Prince Myshkin seems like ridiculous, that might just be saying more about the people that perceive him that way than it is saying about him actually, And we kind of talked about that in the beginning, where it's like, oh, well, you can't just say everything you think and just, you have to kind of like hold some stuff in, and you can't be too forthright. That's that's ridiculous. It makes you appear foolish, but I think it's just saying a lot more about the other characters than it says about him.
Yeah, that's a wonderful analysis of it. And perhaps we can move on to talk a bit about the social status, and before we end off on talking about whether it's whether The Idiot was a failed project or was it an unfailed project. What was it? Or a successful one. I don't think unfailed is a word in my vocabulary. I think I made that up. But what do you think about social status perplexity? I think you had a few ideas about that.
Yeah, that was something that I noticed a lot of in this novel and that's a great segue too, because it does tie into what I was just kind of touching on before this, is that the reason that one of the reasons I believe that he's just very sincere and forthright is that he is not concerned as much with social status. He is not trying to vie for a position above him. There's a very interesting character which we didn't mention. One of the General Evolgan, I think, or one of the generals, I get them mixed up sometimes, but he is constantly telling stories that bolster his position and his status. And, he'll even steal a story out of the newspaper that makes him appear very cool and witty. And, he's constantly puffing himself up to appear as a very noble character or a very accomplished person, but he's kind of mocked by everyone because they are aware of this. Whereas Prince Myshkin, he's not ever, he's more humble than that. He's not trying to get ahead in society or to like achieve more, have more parties, or like become more liked by everyone. So he kind of stands out from everyone else. There's a lot of characters in the novel that are doing this. They're either marrying into wealth or status, which is very typical of the time. But a lot of their decisions and a lot of their conversations and everything seems to be motivated towards this end of like appearing as the most sophisticated person in the room.
That's really interesting, and I think the social status does play a massive role in it. I know, Katrina, you had some thoughts about that. What are your thoughts about social status in The Idiot?
Yeah, it's like a two-sided coin, because Myshkin can afford not to care because he has a certain social status, prince, and he has financial means also. And like for the social climbing is, like that's completely valid point, that like everyone in the book just try to appear more sophisticated than they are. And I think making you just like afford to relax and not pay attention or about your status because you already have it and you have enough like a financial pillow you can just lean on. You can just forget about that. However, like some people with the same like social status as Myshkin who will still puff it up and go beyond and beyond and beyond and beyond and make it like complete pointless. It just shows that Myshkin completely feels satisfied like with himself as a person, and he doesn't need to puff it up. And it's great and healthy thing to do. Yeah, it's just a matter of social climbing. That's what we naturally tend to do.
That's an interesting idea. Perplexity, do you have anything to say to that?
Well, yeah. One of the things that I think is important is that in the beginning of the novel, Prince Myshkin had nothing. All he had was the clothes that he was wearing. He does later inherit great wealth, but he had no. I mean, he had the title prince, of course, and he had like kind of a distant connection to the what are they? I'm trying to remember the last name. The Yapanchin, I think. But he just kind of showed up and he just wanted to say hello. He just wanted to meet them, but they kind of thought he had ulterior motives. He gladly accepted a job, like a low job of just like a calligrapher, because he enjoys doing that. But he really didn't have money, and all he had was the title, but really no status other than that, because he came from Switzerland, I believe it was. So no one in the town even knew him. And he was just kind of making an acquaintance when he showed up straight from the train to their house,
I think that's a very interesting idea, because when you're thinking about social status in the world, a lot of people like chasing these things, and it could be social status, it could be money, power, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it comes under a lot of different names. It's very easy, I suppose, in that pursuit of that power, or pursuit of that social status, to lose who you are as a person, lose your integrity, I suppose. And something which I think always sticks out to me is that the most important way you judge someone is by their integrity, by how strong they hold true to their values. Doesn't matter who the person is, doesn't matter what they're doing, what they are, what they believe in, but as long as they remain integral to themselves and hold strong to their values, that's the most important thing. And you can say what not about anyone else, but if someone is, and this goes back to Ekaterina's point on self-love, is like, if you love who you are, if you love your values, and you're reminded that your values are good, and this ties to Myshkin as well, right? If you are so convinced that your values are well, it doesn't matter what other people think of you, you still remain that integral person, or you have integrity, and that's something which will keep you through a lot of things. Now, I know Ekaterina wanted to talk a bit about the idea of a sugar baby. Ekaterina, what are your thoughts about that?
I first of all think that amount of pressure and shame that was put on Nastasya isn't fair. Situation she was doesn't make her less of a person, or like, because she's like less valued on the marriage market because of the situation. And yeah, that's all what I wanted to say. Okay.
Yes, it's an interesting idea, I suppose. The situation with Nastasya, how she goes between Rogozhin and Myshkin, and that discussion, or that relationship between the two is definitely something which is worthy of note, and something which I suppose a lot of us have things to think about. And I suppose to end off this live stream, not live stream, what am I on about? I'm losing my mind. My voice is failing me. But in the theme of failures of my speaking, what are our thoughts about Dostoevsky's thoughts that The Idiot was a failed project? Do you think The Idiot was a failed project or not? Was it something successful? Did he achieve his goals? Even if he didn't achieve his goals, do you think it was ultimately a very successful work? And I don't mean successful as in it sold a lot of copies. I mean successful in the sense of it being meaningful. What are your thoughts about that, Perplexity?
Well, I view it as a successful work in that I got a lot out of it. And just as like a character study, it's immensely insightful. And I don't know if maybe it didn't achieve exactly what Dostoevsky wanted to achieve with it, but I think it's an incredibly successful novel, and it's one of my favorites among his, definitely. And I could read it again, and it's the character interactions are just, and I mentioned this in the beginning, the characters are so well fleshed out and the interactions are so interesting in how they relate to each other. I think I got a lot out of reading this, definitely.
Ekaterina, what are your thoughts?
I think it's a great novel, and I think that more we bring up the idea of empathy, better it will be. Yeah, we need more people like Myshkin, and I think it's a great book. Like, as an artistic person, I also tend to rewatch a video or see again the drawing and say, oh no, it wasn't good enough, I could do it better. But in the end, it found its audience and it made a difference, and I think it's what matters in the end.
I think that's a very beautiful idea, and it's definitely something that Dostoevsky's The Idiot is my favorite book out of all of Dostoevsky's works. And even though people may disagree with me on this, I do think it is a very beautiful book. And while I'm not exactly sure why he thought it was a failed project, perhaps he felt it was just ultimately impossible to represent a Christ-like figure. I mean, in his letters he writes how difficult it was, and perhaps you could look at Alyosha and look at the differences between Alyosha and Myshkin to see perhaps there were some developments of the Christ-like figure in Alyosha which weren't found in Myshkin. And those are things to think about, I suppose. And those are some questions that I would like to end off and leave you with at the end of this video. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed this discussion about The Idiot. Hopefully it raised some thought-provoking questions. Maybe you agree, disagree. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll be very glad to talk to you there. And of course, before we end off this video, is there any way in which you can find us? Perplexity, how can the audience find what you're working on currently if they're interested in listening to more of your content?
Yeah, anyone can go to the YouTube channel Iron Age Archive. We try to put up videos as often as we can on various different topics, if discussing novels or thinking of philosophical ideas is interesting to you. Check us out over there. And also go to ironagearchive.com, where we post a lot of videos that are relevant to discussions such as this, that we try to share and spread a lot of the information and just help other creators get more contact with other people. So find some interesting videos there too. But subscribe to Iron Age Archives YouTube channel, and we'll be uploading content pretty regularly.
That's wonderful. Ekaterina, if they're interested in finding your work, where should they go?
If you want to find my work, you can go on my channel, Katya Pavlov Art, where I post, well, at least once a month there will be something. Some piece of content. I have a lot of things and ideas in the pipeline. It's just a matter of time and getting things done. Also, I will launch the website by the end of the year. I just don't know when the video will be published. Is it will be ready or not? Also, some of my episodes about Slavic mythology and folklore are available at Medium as articles. If you want to just switch from listening to reading, you can do that too. And see you there. Becoming a dandelion is good.
Absolutely wonderful. And of course, if you're interested in any work of Dostoevsky or existentialism, or interviews with professors, or debates or discussions about existentialism and philosophy in general, theology, whatnot, then go check out Philosophy for All. I aim to provide free and accessible philosophical content to everyone. And also check out my website, josh-yen.com, where you can go check out my newsletter and some posts which I do to post in relation to what I'm doing, philosophy and whatnot. So with that out of the way, hopefully you've all enjoyed this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed this discussion. Stay safe. See you soon. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.